This is the Fighting Through podcast, episode 91. Kisses on a Postcard.
Early on a June morning in 1940, when my brother Jack was 11 and I was just 7, we became evacuees, vackies, and were carried off to another world.
The Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life. The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us.
It's 1940. The last soldiers have just come back from Dunkirk. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. And Britain's going to be bombed. And what she did is she said, I'm going to give you a secret code. And she handed them a postcard. And on the postcard it said, Dear Mum and Dad, arrived safe and well, love Jack and Terry. And then it was addressed to her back in London. And the kids are like, what's the code? What's the code? Plymouth was famously bombed in the war. Dad was actually caught up in the bombing.
Have you got any gum, chum?
Hey, you speak American?
Give me a kiss, Billy. Oh, Henry, give your mum a kiss before you go to work.
Over there! There's a German plane, look! It's ever so low. Look at all those rockets going up!
That be the Royal Navy and Devonport Docks giving them what for. Come on, boys!
Hey, calm down, children. That's enough. Oh, God, 'tis not possible.
Will anything be left? Look at that one.
Look! There'll be one of them caught in the searchlight.
Oh, lost her. 'Tis hell on earth. 'Tis the inferno come to punish us.
Not us, Bess. Them.
I was the luckiest of children. I had 2 childhoods. My earliest memories are of rattling trams in pre-war southeast London, Deptford, crowded and grimy. That was my playground. Us kids, we lived in the streets, gangs of us on every corner, in and out of fights constantly. A ball and a bike were essential from the age of 5. A vehicle disturbing our games of football or cricket was a rarity. There were no parked cars because none of our parents owned one. Then came the war and my other childhood. Early on a June morning in 1940, when my brother Jack was 11 and I was just 7, we became evacuees, vackies, and were carried off to another world.
Hello again, and I wish you a very warm, musical World War II welcome to the Fighting Through Second World War podcast. I'm Paul Shield, son of Bill Shield, whose World War II memoirs have been published by Pen and Sword in Fighting Through from Dunkirk to Hamburg. The aim of this podcast is to hear family stories, memoirs and interviews with veterans in all the countries and all the forces. I dare you to listen. Just recently, I've cried so much with sorrow. I've cried so much with laughter. And if you could cry from smiling too much, then surely I'd be doing that too. Because that's the effect that binging on Kisses has had on me the last month. I'm talking about Kisses on a Postcard by the late Terence Frisby. And today I'm interviewing his son Dominic Frisby, and what an absolute corker of an episode, I can promise you. In the intro you heard some fleeting glimpses into what's on offer. Dominic's work is full to bursting with Dunkirk spirit, steam trains and all the best of World War II Britishness, as the Kisses on a Postcard musical charts the lives of two young British evacuees during World War II. Today's episode brings to life so much that we've previously heard about in the Fighting Through podcast: rationing, the Blitz, evacuation of children to faraway places, and never, ever was an episode better timed to coincide with world events. Dominic Frisby is a British author, comedian and voice actor, and he's a financial guru. So when I was preparing for this interview, I wasn't sure whether I was going to talk about books, Bitcoin or banter, but as soon as I'd listened to Kisses on a Postcard, I just knew it was going to be none of the above, and all about, well, kisses. Hello, Dominic. Welcome to the Fighting Through podcast, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks very much, Paul, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be talking about this project.
It's been quite a long trek bringing this project to fruition, hasn't it?
It's been an extraordinarily long trek, and it's a story that my father wrote, Terence Frisby, and he first wrote it in the mid to late 1980s, and we both were just madly in love with it, and this is the latest incarnation.
What's the background to the story?
It's the story of his time as an evacuee in World War II, when he was 7 years old and his brother was 11. They were sent from their family, from their home in southeast London, to escape German bombing, and they were sent all the way down to Cornwall. And this was 1940.
Right.
And they would then spend the whole of the war in a tiny little village in the middle of nowhere in Cornwall.
We're going to play one of the songs in a minute, Dominic. Perhaps you could give me the backdrop to it.
It's 1940. The last soldiers have just come back from Dunkirk. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. And Britain's going to be bombed. And so this directive comes out from government that every child in the cities around the country is to be evacuated for their own safety. And my dad was 7, and his brother Jack was 11. And the story begins with Mum tying they had little labels tied around their necks with their names on it. And the story begins there with Mum tying the labels on their neck. Nobody knows where the kids are going, who's going to take them in, how long they're going to be gone for. And you can just imagine the terrible wrench that must have been on parents and children around the country. You're sending your kids away and you have no idea if you're ever going to see them again. And so my grandmother tried to turn the whole thing into an adventure for them. And what she did is she said, I'm going to give you a secret code, like the Secret Service. And she handed them a postcard. And on the postcard it said, Dear Mum and Dad, arrived safe and well, love Jack and Terry. And then it was addressed to her back in London. And the kids are like, what's the code? What's the code? And Mum says, when you get there, you're to write the address of where you end up on this postcard. And then you're to put 1 kiss if it's horrible, and I'll come straight down there and get you. You put 2 kisses if it's okay, and you put 3 kisses if it's nice, and then I'll know. So that was their code. Mum then took them, along with everyone else in their school, down to the local train station in Deptford, and they were put on the train along with everyone else in their school. Dad loved trains, very excited to be on this steam train. And you can just imagine that scene, all those mums and dads on the platform waving goodbye to their kids, and the train pulling away, and you never knowing if you're going to see them again. And the train goes off and it crosses through London. They've diverted the track, so it actually went from Deptford all the way through round Clapham Junction, and then off through Surrey and Wiltshire and Dorset along that line there, all the way to Cornwall. And at Liskeard, the train stopped, and they were herded off the train, and they were put on buses, and the buses fanned out into various villages in the area around Liskeard, and that school, Creek Road Secondary, was broken up for good. And Dad and his brother, this was the other thing they were told, whatever happens, you stay together. So Dad and his brother, along with 40 or 50 other kids from his school, were taken into this little village called Dobwalls, about 7 or 8 miles from Liskeard. Oh no, probably about 4 miles from Liskeard. And they were herded into the village hall. And there are all these strange Cornish people with strange Cornish accents all standing round. And they were made to stand in the centre of the village hall. And the great expression at the time was, I'll take that one there. That expression became part of the lexicon. I'll take that one there. And they were literally, the kids were picked out like cattle in a cattle market. And as it turned out, Dad and his brother were picked out by a Welsh couple who'd moved down to Cornwall. This is when they've just arrived at the cottage. There was no lavatory, outside lav and all that.
Yeah.
And this first song that we're going to play takes place on the first night when they arrive at the cottage, and the 2 boys are alone. They're top and tailed in a bed, and they're sitting there by candlelight, trying to decide how many kisses to put on their postcard.
How many kisses?
I vote 3.
What would Mum and Dad think of it here?
Don't know.
No electricity. They wouldn't like that.
I don't care.
There's no bathroom.
I don't care.
Outside lav, all they have. I can't go in an outside lav.
I don't mind. I don't care.
What if it's freezing cold out there?
That's what the pot's for, don't you see?
I vote 1.
I vote 3.
Just one bed, got to share, all squashed up in it.
I don't care. Kisses on a postcard we must write. Something we've got to do tonight. Kisses on a postcard, what'll they show? Only Mum is going to know.
What about Gwyn?
Gwyn's not bad, even though you can see he's mad.
Auntie Rose, what do you say?
She says weird things, but she's okay. Not Uncle Jack, though, he plays rough. Pulled my hair, called me scruff.
Kisses on a postcard, what do we do?
I still say 3.
Well, I say 2. Kisses on a postcard, 3, 2, 1.
Better be quick or it won't get done. If we put less than 3, Mum and Dad will think it's rotten here. They'll be worried.
Yeah, well, there's the trains, they're good.
And the station, right next to us.
That's terrific.
Hey, wait! I've just remembered. Hens!
What about hens?
Eggs, stupid. Real eggs. Not that horrible powdery stuff. Eggs for you, eggs for me, eggs for breakfast, supper and tea. Poached or baked, scrambled or fried.
On board with soldiers on this side.
What do you say now? What's your score?
All right, 3.
Why not?
Mum only said up to 3.
But don't you see, the more kisses we put, the more happy they're going to be.
Yeah, it's terrific here, really, isn't it? Like being on holiday, only there's no sea.
We don't have to stop at 4. Let's do hundreds.
Yeah!
Kisses on a postcard, one by one. All round the edges, this is fun. Kisses on a postcard, squashed up tight, telling Mum that we're all right.
Dominic, how did the thinking evolve to get this from your dad's original memories to where it is today?
Dad used to talk about it, and he wrote it originally as a series of memories, if you like, as a radio play in the mid-1980s. And it was broadcast on Radio 4, and it got the biggest response that anyone in the BBC Radio 4, in the BBC radio department could remember in terms of letters from listeners. And Dad would even get letters from people in Germany who had been evacuated to escape Allied bombing.
Wow.
And we actually, last year I was on holiday with a group of friends. We were skiing, and we had to drive from the ski resort back to the airport in Geneva. So I played them the first hour as we were driving back. And this was, you know, the first scene when Mum's saying goodbye to her kids and they're all saying goodbye. And this was just as Putin had invaded Ukraine. And everyone in the car said, this is exactly what's happening in Ukraine now.
Yes.
So the story, even though it's about 2 boys from London in World War II, the story of evacuation and war and is universal.
Yes.
Dad wrote this thing as a radio play, and it was they actually broadcast it a record number of times. And then it was optioned to be a film. Ken Loach and various others optioned it to be a film, and it got stuck in development hell. And Dad's friend was a chap called Jeremy James Taylor, he'd founded the National Youth Music Theatre way back in the day. And Jeremy had always been saying to Dad, you should turn this into a stage musical. And Dad was going, no, it's going to be a film. And then one time they were both keen golfers, and they were playing golf in North Devon, and they came into the clubhouse afterwards, and there was a proprietor of the Theatre Royal Barnstaple was in the clubhouse, and he said, have you two got a project for me? And they looked at each other and said, well, as a matter of fact, we do. And they hadn't. Dad was a member of this thing called the Stage Golfing Society, which is basically for unemployed actors and theatricals to go and play golf. And there was another guy in the Stage Golfing Society who was a chap called Gordon Clyde, and Gordon wrote great comic songs. So Dad said to Gordon, would you write the music? And so Dad wrote the book, Gordon wrote the music, and Jeremy would direct it. And Gordon, so they put this production on in Barnstaple in 2003, and that's when I fell head over heels in love with it.
Wow, so that's 20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago.
Gosh.
And I remember it was a sort of community theatre project. There was professional actors in the main roles, and the rest of it was all played by amateurs. But I've just never seen anything so wonderful in the theatre in all my life. But it wasn't the finished product yet. You know, to get a musical really good takes years and years of development sometimes.
Dominic, I'm just going to divert from there for a minute because I want to cover a little bit more of the story and introduce one of the characters. You've done amazingly well to get the cast of singers and actors together to do this, because you managed to land John Owen Jones as the lead in Uncle Jack, and of course he was voted the best ever Jean Valjean in Les Mis. And you've also got Katie Seacombe, Marsha Warren, Rosie Cavaliero, Evelyn Hoskins, and many others. So they're all names that a lot of people will have heard about. But moving over to Uncle Jack, tell me a little bit more about his character.
He was a plate layer on the Great Western Railway, and he'd been a soldier in World War I. His name was he was known as Uncle Jack. He'd been a soldier in World War I. And he'd survived a thing called the Mametz Wood Massacre, which was when the Welsh Bantams, who was a regiment, and I think they were all below the height of 5'4", and the Welsh Bantams had come up against the Prussian Guard, who were all over 6 foot. And this was one of the great massacres. When Uncle Jack would later tell the boys the story of this encounter, the boys thought it was really unfair that such short men should come up against such big men. And Uncle Jack would say, "It doesn't matter. Everyone's the same height when a bullet hits him. He's horizontal."
Yeah.
But he was because of his experiences in World War I, and he was a Welsh coal miner. He was a real old school socialist. Ernest Bevin was a big hero of his, very anti-Tory, anti-war, anti-authoritarian, from that mentality. Fiercely proud little Welshman, 5 foot in height. His wife was taller than him, and she was just a gentle, kind woman. And when he'd gone back to his village in Wales after World War I, he was one of just 17 who had survived this Mammoth's Wood massacre. He was the only man from his village to come back to this village in Wales. And apparently everyone would just look at him. All the women would just look at him, and it just got too much. The only man to come back to the village. Can you imagine? And so that's why they moved down to Cornwall, and he got a job as a plate layer on the railway. Anyway, this was the couple that they were taken in by. They didn't know all this. They were just picked out. Dad and his brother were picked out at random by this couple, and taken back to their house.
I know the feeling of getting off a train and waiting for someone to pick you up. Years ago, I went on a French exchange visit when I was a teenager doing French at school, and I ended up in France waiting for this French lad to pick me up, or the family to pick me up. And I was waited around half an hour before they arrived, and in the meantime, everybody else was coming and going, and it's quite a forlorn feeling that you get when you're not sure what's going to happen to you. So I mean, that was in modern times, really. So I feel for these boys when they were doing what they were doing. Gosh, and they didn't even know who was going to pick them up, did they? They didn't have a name.
They knew nothing. Now everyone would have checks and all the rest of it. The whole thing was just totally random.
Come on, everybody. You've got to make a choice. So let's get on with it.
Who are these people staring at me? What are they doing? Where can we be? I wish I were home comfy and snug in my bed. I wish I were home drinking cocoa instead.
I'll take this handsome ear, and I'll take this and come along, my dear.
We'll have these 2 young maids, don't you worry, cherubs, don't you be afraid.
I'll take A.
We'll take they. Come with us, we can fit in 3.
Quick and small, brass and tall, all together in a Cornish stall.
All these strange voices that I can hear. What are they saying? Why are they here? I wish I were home back with my dad playing cards. I wish I were home playing in the backyard.
Hey, big strong lad thee be, you can come and work up on the farm with me.
I need some help, you see, washing clothes and cooking in the scullery.
Hoe in here,
So in there,
mucking out.
ready for the fair.
Work is rough, you look tough, so my dears, you're gonna need a lot of puff.
And, some of the children went on to have happy experiences. A lot of them didn't. And a lot of bad things happened to that evacuation, to those evacuees. And I think, generally speaking, in the historical narrative of our country, the damage that evacuation did to families and family institutions across the country is an untold story. And it left many people, some people never saw their parents again. Other kids suffered terrible abuses. But Dad regarded it, he would always call it his second childhood. And, he regarded himself as very lucky by what happened to him. But anyway, they're picked out by this couple, and they go back to their house. And in the house, there's 2 guys who've just been evacuated from Dunkirk. One of them's got shell shock. He can't speak. And, you know, the boys are terribly excited by these two men. And there's a canary in a cage. There's no electricity in the house, just oil lamps.
Wow. There's
a warm hearth, and it's a tiny little cottage at the end of a row of cottages by the railway. And as I said, my Dad's dad worked on the railways. Dad and his brother, they loved the trains. They were terribly excited by these trains. Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack had their own son, Gwyn, who was about to become a soldier himself, a young man in his, I guess he was a late teenager or early 20s.
Yeah.
And he was sort of funny and entertaining. And then outside there was a pig in the yard and chickens and woods with streams to dam, a little coombe, a tor to climb. And Dad and his brother looked around them and they thought they had died and gone to heaven. They
yes.
absolutely fell in love.
Was it something of an adventure playground for them compared with what they'd had in London?
Well, yes and no. I mean, he says, when he describes his childhood in London, he just says there were no cars on the streets in those days because none of their families owned one. So he lived in the streets outside playing cricket and football and getting up to no good. He said he was in and out of fights constantly as a little boy.
Yeah.
But it was a different type of adventure.
It's the old school!
We're off on an adventure somewhere far away. Off on an adventure, leaving town today. To somewhere in the country, off to pastures new. Where are we going? We haven't got a clue. We're off on an adventure, could be anywhere. Off on an adventure, where will we stay there? We don't know where we're going, haven't got a clue. For all we know, it could be Timbuktu.
Let's talk about how the kids settle into their newfound home, because it seems to me there's an evolution from enmity to friendship as time goes on. Here's a short clip illustrating how the conflict first started.
They come down here from London, so swanky and stuck up. They challenge us to take 'em on and say they'll tough us up. So we'll blow away them vacky kids, to kingdom come. We'll blow away them smarty pants and kick 'em up the bum.
Could you talk me a little bit through that?
Well, what happened was the vacky kids and the local kids fought all the time. And they would organise these massive fights. Dad would record some of them. There was this amazing snowball fight that they had one time in, I think it was, there was a really bad winter one year. I think it was 1942 was a really bad winter. And he talked about this out of control snowball fight. But they fought all the time. And the problem is that the London kids were just savvier. And they were, you know, the local kids were just a sort of little bit country bumpkin, if you like.
Yeah.
And so the London kids sort of had contempt for the locals. And the local kids resented the pushy newcomers. And Dad said, you know, we were the grey squirrels, they were the red squirrels. And so they would, you know, organise football matches and cricket matches, but every type of event they organised, the Vacky kids would absolutely, you know, if they played football, it would be like 17-0 to the Vacky kids, that kind of thing. But anyway, so, you know, there were all these fights, but gradually over time, things normalised. But again, it must have been very difficult for the families that took them in, suddenly having these Cockneys, you know, Cockney kids in their homes, and must, you know, as difficult as it was for the Vackies, it was also difficult for the locals.
Yes.
But everyone made do as best they could. And so, yeah, they fought and fought and fought.
It's quite sad, really, because my dad, of course, was away in the war during this time, and it's interesting to contemplate how Dunkirk happened, Alamein, D-Day, and all our young soldiers fighting for their lives and dying and being wounded, and yet these kids at such a tender age just can't keep the peace. And do they really realise what's going on of the other side of the world?
Well, they know some of it. You know, all the soldiers were real heroes to those boys. You know, they probably looked up to the soldiers like kids today look up to football players or something.
Yes.
You know, they were their heroes. And in fact, Gwyn, the son of Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack, would go off to war himself. And he was eventually killed in action in Sicily when towards the end of the war. And that's one of the tragic stories within the musical is within the story is, you know, the loss of Gwyn's death.
That would have been 1943 then, because my dad was involved in the Battle of Sicily. And in fact, the last episode on this podcast was about a memoir from some guy who fought in Sicily.
Every event in the war takes place in the musical, if you like, but it's all seen through the eyes of this tiny Cornish village.
Yeah.
And so, for example, Plymouth was famously bombed in the war, and Dad was actually caught up in the bombing. They'd gone into Plymouth shopping, and they spent the first night of Plymouth being laid to waste in an underpass on the railway, and then the next night they watched it being bombed, and the whole village just stood on the tor and watched Plymouth 20 miles away just being destroyed. And it's a terribly emotional moment in the scene.
Uncle Jack, is that what's happening in London to our mum and dad?
No, not nearly so. London's enormous. Plymouth's small, it just looks worse.
Oh no. It's why we're all vackies.
Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me.
Another great moment in the war prior to D-Day was the arrival of all the American soldiers. And, you know, I thought Dad was making this up, but we've since done some research and we found out it was true. But the regiment that was billeted on Dad's village, the American soldiers regiment that was billeted on Dad's village, you know, this tiny village in Cornwall, was a regiment from Louisiana. And the soldiers were all black. It's one of the black regiments. And so Dad, you know, no one in Cornwall people in England were foreigners, but, you know, Americans were from Mars, but black Americans, you know, they were just, from another world. And Dad said, you know, this guy from New Orleans itself gave him a tap dancing lesson on a sheet of plywood outside the gates where the soldiers were all billeted. And, I mean, that's a good song we could play is When the American Soldiers Arrive. We wrote this great number. We could play that one.
I love the GI episode in this story. Let's go for it.
Hi there, kids.
Well, hi there, kids.
How you doing?
She was right. They are all black.
All
right, I will. Have you got any gum, chum?
Hey, you speak American?
That American?
You dig?
What?
You talk the jive, Clive?
My name's not Clive, it's Alan.
We kids, we loved them. We wore their hats, chewed their gum, held their strange hands and ate their candy. We rode on their jeeps, tooth-loosening joy rides across the fields. We drilled with their rifles and learned their slang. I even had a tap dancing lesson on a sheet of plywood at the army camp gates from a man from New Orleans itself.
Hello.
How are you?
Good day.
We're soldiers from the US of A. Pleased to meet you, sir.
Pleased to meet you, ma'am.
Pleased to meet you, pretty lady. We're here for Uncle Sam. At your service this fine day. Any questions? Please just say.
Questions? Loads! What's it like in the States? Is it just like the flicks? What's the weather like? Have you flown in a plane? Are there cops and robbers? Are there gangsters too? Are there cowboys and Indians? Do you know John Wayne? Have you ever seen a puma? Have you eaten a satsuma? Do you like hamburgers? Do your cows go moo? Have you crossed the Mississippi? Have you caught a barracuda? Have you been to Colorado or to Kalamazoo? Have you got pubs?
No, we have bars.
Do you catch the bus?
No, we all drive cars.
Have you ever had a pasty?
No, we have not.
Is it true that you eat dogs?
Only if they're hot.
Have you crossed the Golden Gate? Have you climbed the Empire State?
Have you ever smelt a skunk? Why'd you call a tramp a bum?
Do you have steam trains? Can you tell me jump? One last question. Have you got any gum? Got any gum? Chum?
We might have some.
Any gum? Chum?
Now don't all scrum.
Any gum? Chum?
It sure is yum. You can chew it till your mouth goes numb.
Got any gum? Chum?
This sure is fun.
Any gum? Chum?
Do the chewing hum.
Yummy yum yum.
Rum pum pum.
And that is how you do the chewing hum.
We've got snakes and alligators and our own refrigerators. Oranges and peaches, eagles, buffalo. Bears and avocados, a city called Chicago. Frightening tornadoes, tropics, desert and snow. We've got rodeos and ranches, grapes upon the branches. We drink lots of Coca-Cola and there's ice to crush. We've got Mormons, we've got Quakers, we've got towering skyscrapers, but no privies for us. Our lavatories flush.
Do you drink tea?
No siree.
Speak Cherokee?
Not frequently.
Do you play billiards?
We shoot pool.
Would you like a game of cricket?
We don't understand the rules.
Do you know Clark Gable? Is Harper really dumb? Have you ever had a Hershey? Have you hit a home run? Please give me an answer. Can you tell me, John? One last question. Have you got any gum? Got any gum? Chum?
We might have some.
Any gum? Chum?
Now don't all scrum.
Any gum? Chum?
It sure is yum. You can chew it till your mouth goes numb.
Got any gum? Chum?
This sure is fun.
Any gum? Chum?
Do the chewing hum.
Yummy yum yum.
Rum pum pum.
And that is how you do the chewing hum.
Elsie liked them too.
I think they're lovely boys.
One of the great scandals at the time is Dad had this friend who was another evacuee, but she'd actually been evacuated from Plymouth, called Elsie. And she would have been 7 or 8 years older than Dad. And so 15, 16, 17 at the time of the war. And her mother had run off with a sailor or something. And her father was somewhere in Burma. So just a lost girl. And it was a great scandal at the time, but many English girls became pregnant by American soldiers. And Elsie was one of those. She became pregnant by one of the GIs. And she didn't know who the father was. And, we've got a lovely, we've adapted an old Cornish folk song called Sweet Nightingale, where you have one of the GIs courting her. That's a lovely song. And she just dreams of, when she's pregnant, of the soldier's going to come back and take her back to America, and she's going to be a GI bride. And of course, it never happened. And at the end of the war, she was going to be put in one of those homes for unmarried mothers.
Yeah.
And they emerged all over. But in the end, Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack actually took her in as well.
Oh.
They lost their own son, Gwyn. They were going to lose Jack and Terry, who were going back to London at the end of the war, and they took in Elsie.
Yeah.
And they would bring up that kid. Now, the kid was a mixed race kid. And, you know, that would have been a big scandal. But I met an old lady a couple of years ago who was married to one of the boys who lived in the same row of cottages that Dad was evacuated to.
Yeah.
Jimmy Peters was his name. And she was married to him. And she said, no, there was a big scandal, and there was a woman, and she was unmarried, and she had a mixed race kid, and she verified it, that it had happened.
Wow.
So we thought that Dad had been making up the thing that all the soldiers billeted there were black, but they were. It was true.
Hello there, pretty lady. And what's your name?
Elsie.
Hello there, Elsie.
Hello.
I'm Don.
Hello.
Would you like a piece of candy, Elsie?
No, thanks. Well, yes, please.
Here you go.
Of course, lovely. You soldiers are so lucky. You got money, you got warm clothes, food, sweets. We ain't got nothing except empty stomachs.
And where are you going with that pail?
To get some milk.
Sweet maiden so fair, with your golden brown hair, do you hear that sweet melody flow?
Yes, I hear the fond tale of the sweet nightingale as she sings in the valley below. As she sings in the valley below. Brave soldier, so strong, here you do not belong.
Let me carry your pail as we go, and I'll tell you the tale of the sweet nightingale as she sings in the valley below. As she sings in the valley below.
I have hands of my own, I shall do it alone, and along with you, sir, I'll not go. For to hear the fond tale of the sweet nightingale as she sings in the valley below. As she sings in the valley below.
Now don't be afraid, sit with me in the shade on this bank where the primroses grow, and we'll hear the fond tale of the sweet nightingale as she sings in the valley below. As she sings in the valley below.
So she sat herself down, with him there on the ground, on the bank where the primroses grow. And she heard the fond tale of the sweet nightingale as she sings in the valley below. As she sings in the valley below. But they did not agree to be married with speed, and to war and to fight he did go. And her sweet love was spurned when he never returned, as she sang in the valley below, as she sang in the valley below.
Dominic, earlier on in the episode you were talking about how the project evolved from those early days, and I paused things just to talk about Uncle Jack. So I'm going to pick up again now by repeating your last few words, just so we can catch up on where we were.
So they put this production on in Barnstable in 2003, and that's when I fell head over heels in love with it. It was a sort of community theatre project. There was professional actors in the main roles, and the rest of it was all played by amateurs, but I've just never seen anything so wonderful in the theatre all my life. But it wasn't the finished product yet. You know, to get a musical really good takes years and years of development sometimes. So Gordon had written these songs, but he'd also used a lot of music from the time, a lot of folk music, and reworded it, and there were various copyright problems, and it just wasn't quite finished. But then Gordon died in 2007. And so there was this sort of project, but the music wasn't quite finished. And Dad got various other people he met and encountered to write songs. And then they put it on again in about 2013. And it was still great, but because the music had been composed by lots of different people, it was just a little bit not uniform. It was a bit mishmashy, if you like.
Yeah.
So each song was good on its own grounds, but as a whole, it wasn't quite complete. And so during the lockdown, and Dad died in 2020, and I found I came across, when I was going through his stuff, I came across the script and the CD, and I just took it home and I put it on my desk. And during the lockdown, it kept just looking at me on my desk, and I was like, I've got to do something with this. If I don't do something with this, nobody else is going to. I have to do something with this. And one of the things I do is I write comic songs. So I write the words, and my friend writes the music. And so I turned to him, and his name's Martin Wheatley. And I said, Martin, I've got this project. Would you be interested in it? And Martin said, oh, well, as a matter of fact, my father was evacuated from southeast London to Cornwall as well.
Gosh.
So the story touched him. And so Martin is a phenomenal musician. And what we did is we kept all Gordon's music and we just dropped everything else. And then Martin wrote the rest of the music, but broadly speaking, in the style of Gordon. And so the final result is probably maybe 30 or 40% written by Gordon and about 60 or 70% by Martin wrote the music and I wrote the words.
Wow. It's an incredibly accomplished production. Where did you take it then? Because you did the production at the theatre and now you've polished it off and updated it. And how have you delivered that to the public domain at this stage of the game?
So when the lockdown came, I was sitting looking at this project, and to turn it into a film would cost millions and millions of pounds. And to turn it into a stage musical, well, it was the lockdown. It was COVID. You know, you didn't know if the West End was ever even going to come back. But even if it did, you know, again, it would require millions of pounds, which unfortunately I don't have. And not only that, if you did a stage version, as soon as the curtain came down on the last night, it's over.
Yeah.
It's gone. At least when you make a film, it's there forever. So I thought to myself, I don't have the means to turn it into a stage version. I don't have the means to turn it into a film. And even if I did have the capital, you still need, you know, really powerful allies in the film and theatre business just to make stuff work. And I don't have those allies. But I've had a lifetime working in sound studios, background in voiceovers, and I thought, and I'm terribly excited by the boom in podcasts that's been going on. And so I just thought I'll turn it into an audio, originally it was a sort of audio book adaptation, but basically it's a podcast.
Yeah.
And it's 4.5 hours long, you know, basically 10 episodes of about half an hour each. And you listen to it as a podcast in episodic form. And it's a sort of I suppose you'd call it a podcast with music.
Yeah.
And it's got a cast of over 50. And we were able to get some quite big name stars because, again, it was the lockdown and they were all available. And it's got a 15-piece orchestra, and a lot of it was recorded. We were looking for a studio, and the studio we had was really breaking my balls over COVID regulations. And it was just really problematic because they were so, you need to be 2 meters apart, all this kind of thing. And I was like, but, it's an orchestra. You can't do that anyway. I phoned up all the other studios at the last minute, and Abbey Road, the famous studio where the Beatles recorded all their stuff, probably the most famous studio in the world, had a cancellation because, funnily enough, a conductor had to go into quarantine for 2 weeks because he tested positive for COVID. And so they said, look, we'll give it to you at cost. So the whole thing was recorded at Abbey Road.
Wow.
Not the whole thing, but all the music was recorded at Abbey Road.
Yes.
And so, we've got this. It's basically a fifth cast of 50, 25 kids, 15-piece orchestra. It's a huge, epic production recorded at Abbey Road. It's pretty special in that regard.
Dominic, I'll just briefly interrupt to say, if anybody wants to listen to this, it is on a podcast. So in the same way as you listen to my show, anybody can listen to what Dominic's talking about on a podcast player near you. And Dominic, you've got a website, haven't you?
There's a website, kissesonapostcard.com, and from there it takes you to all the various podcast apps. And if you prefer CDs, you can order a CD as well.
Were there any stories that didn't make the final cut, as it were, that your dad shared with you?
They, I wish he was alive today because I would mine him for more stories. And people ask me, the question that people always ask me is, did Dad and his brother stay in touch with Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack?
Yes.
And in fact, what happened is that when Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack lost their own son, Gwyn, and so Dad and Jack were going back to London, end of the war, and they agreed, Dad and his brother agreed. Dad had won a scholarship to Dartford Grammar, which was quite a big deal at the time. So Dad and his brother agreed that his older brother Jack would stay in Cornwall with Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack and become their son, while Dad would go home.
Right.
Because it was only fair.
Gosh.
Yeah, it makes me cry every time I hear that. But anyway, and that's a wonderful scene when they write this letter home saying that we've decided that one of us should stay.
Over the subsequent years, did your dad stay in touch with his brother Jack?
That's the question. That he stayed in touch with his brother Jack. Jack actually came back in the end because Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack took in Elsie, the girl. But so he's always stayed in touch with his brother. But did he stay in touch with Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack?
Yes.
That's the confusing thing. Is Uncle Jack and his brother was called Jack as well. But
yeah,
what it was. But did he stay in touch with them? And I don't know the answer to that question, and it's the question that people always ask me. But I don't think he did.
Right.
I think he must have written them a couple of letters, and then how lives, there wasn't modern communication.
No.
And I think they just must have drifted apart.
Yeah.
But but you asked me, are there stories that I missed out? Well, if you were doing a stage version of this, it could only last 2 hours.
Yes. Yeah.
And there was a book Dad wrote the book called Kisses on a Postcard as well. And so I mined that, and I mined the old radio play, the original radio play. And in the end, I decided that rather than try and keep it to 2 hours, I would just put everything in.
Yes.
And that's why it's so long, 4.5 hours and episodic. And retrospectively, I just wish I knew more stories of the time because I'd put more in, because there's just so many wonderful episodes.
You've got many, many characters, lovable characters, both animal and human. One of my favourites was Granny Peters, that I've nicknamed everyone's favourite grandma. And she's just such a lovely old lady. But can you tell me a little bit of background to her?
Well, Granny Peters was an old Cornish lady who lived in the same row of cottages. And in one episode in the story, I think Dad described her as half mad, half witch or something like that. But she was a senile old Cornish lady, and she'd had I think she'd had 9 sons or something like that. Yeah. And she just gradually lost all of them.
Oh.
You know, one was killed by a railway, another was killed in the Boer War. You know, she kept talking about the war.
Yes.
And the war she was talking about was the Boer War.
Yes, yeah.
But anyway, there's a wonderful episode in the story where Dad and his brother, they go and try and steal her gooseberries.
Yeah.
And they get caught. And they have to go and apologise to her. And they sort of have to sit with her. And Granny Peters is played by Marsha Warren, who's, you know, double Olivier Award-winning actress, and she was wonderful in the role. And it's a great scene. And then at the end of the scene, we play this lovely folk song that was that Martin adapted, and it was sung by this girl called Daisy Mortimer from she's from Dulwich, but she sings this song. And I don't know, do you want to play a little extract from the scene of Granny Peters, or perhaps play There Was an Old Lady Skin and Bone, because it's a beautiful song?
I think we could do both, really. We'll do a little bit of Granny Peters, where she slobbers all over the children, showering them with love and kisses. And then we'll do the Skin and Bone one, should we?
Perfect.
All right.
One day, Jack and I joined Frank Emmett and Elsie behind the row of outside privies that sat across the foot of the gardens of railway cottages. Our plan? A raid on Granny Peters' gooseberry bushes. Granny Peters, to us half funny, half witch, lived at number 4. She was Jimmy Peters' nan, and her gooseberry bushes were laden with golden, hairy goosegogs.
Look, Frank, it's best if Elsie keeps watch here and we crawl across the paths.
Yeah, I vote for that.
I want to come with you.
You can't.
Why?
Because you're useless.
You mean you are, you sod.
You always make a noise or get seen or something.
I can't help it if people notice me.
Well, Terry's the smallest. He can get right in under the prickles and pass out the goosegogs.
Yeah, no one will see me.
Then you and me, Frank, can get round the back there and get them all there.
OK.
And Elsie can stay by the corner and see all the windows and if anybody comes to the bogs.
I'm not staying there, it smells.
Stop moaning or we won't give you any.
Don't want any.
All right, come on. Terry first.
I suppose any plan that included an unwilling Elsie was doomed. We wriggled round the odorous privies on our stomachs with an excessive secrecy that would have excited attention from a mile away. We boys slid among the bushes while Elsie kept watch and communed with her changing body. In the cocoon of the gooseberry bushes, it was both cosy and painful. No matter how careful I was, they pricked.
Come on, Terry. Pass them out.
I am.
He's eating them.
I only had a few.
Hey, you! You boys! What you do?
Oh, no. That's her.
Well, what's he doing in there?
Where's Elsie?
She's scarping.
What are you lying down in there?
Ow, I'm stuck.
You're squashing them all.
I can't help it. It hurts.
Frank ran for it. Jack stayed with me.
Come on, you two. Out of there a minute.
So you two tried to steal Granny Peters' gooseberries, did you?
Sorry, Uncle Jack.
Well, did you?
We were only scrumping.
Scrumping? What's that then? Cockney for stealing?
Scrumping is when it's apples and things.
I know what it is.
I'll never hold up my head in the street again. Ashamed I am of you both. Poor old Granny Peters.
What are we going to do with you two?
Dunno.
You're going to go into her and say you're sorry to start with. And you take her in some of my rock cakes.
Yes, Auntie Rose.
You know she do make jam from all her fruit. And she earns her money from it. And she do give us a jar every Christmas. And then you steal 'em.
Sorry.
If you wanted some gooseberries, why didn't you just ask? Were you hungry?
No.
Don't we feed you?
Yes, Uncle Jack.
Of course you do.
You take her my rock cakes, and you go in there, and you ask her if there's anything you can do to help her.
Granny Peters.
Perhaps she's out.
She's never out. Granny Peters.
Who's
that?
Sus, Granny Peters. Jack and Terry. The boys from Auntie Rose's.
Oh, the vackies. Oh, all right, my booties.
We brought you some rock cakes from Auntie Rose.
Granny Rose. Oh, her rock cakes. Oh, get him here, I'll soak they in my tea. Come in. So, you boys be from Lennon, eh?
Yes.
I was to there once with my Jimmy. Too many horses everywhere. Horses all round you. Wear some Plymouth trousers. Oh, come here, my pretty. Come closer.
Oh, no.
Go on.
She smells funny.
Oh, you some rare and no mistake. No, don't wriggle. I won't hurt you. Oh, you mind me of my Billy. Ginga, they called thee all down Dupwell Street. Ginga, you're palmy. You want to join the army?
Auntie Rose sent us.
Oh, Billy, my firstborn, my handsome, where you to now? South Africa he went, and the boys shot him. There's his medals. I mean, he weren't simple. The army took him, so couldn't have been, could he? He never hurt no woman. They led him on, 'cause they thought not he. You wouldn't hurt a fly, would you, my handsome?
She won't let me go.
Don't worry. I think she's all right.
His father, he was the simple one. I had 8 for me, all gone to God. They took them all. 3 in the war, 2 when they was little like you, my booty. Henry, he went on the railway working on the line down the valley. They threw a bottle from a train and hit his lovely face. 412 to St. Oswald twas. Oh, I outlived all my own children. 'Tis not natural. 'Tis wonderful lonely, I can tell you.
Isn't Jimmy Peters' dad your son?
Oh, yeah, oh, I forgot he. Well, I don't count he, he's still here.
If you let me go, I'll take your jug and get some water from the pump.
But for it is still a full a minute.
Auntie Rose said we got to.
Oh, Auntie Rose, yeah. Rock cakes, they well named, all right.
And we're sorry we tried to steal your gooseberries.
You want some gooseberries? You go on then, they be handsome now. You, look, take that bowl and you bring me some, I'll make you some jam. Oh, yeah. Come here, little one, let me touch your hair. Oh.
I got to go. Auntie Rose is calling.
Give me a kiss, Billy. Oh, Henry, give your mum a kiss before you go to work.
We'll bring you some gooseberries in this bowl, Granny Peters. Come on, quick.
The 412 to Snazzle twas. They shoddy.
Her ethereal, quavering voice still echoes in my head to this day.
There was a lady, all skin and bone. She lived in a cottage all alone. One evening on a holiday, the lady went to the church to pray. And in the graveyard she tarried a while. She had a sad and a woeful smile, and as she tarried, her eyes looked down, and she
Oh, that was Granny Peters, everyone's favourite grandma. Bless her. And talking about sort of non-human, lovable characters, is there another scene where your dad meets a baby elephant at the circus?
Oh, that's a great scene. I forgot that scene. It's lovely. Yeah, I mean, by all means, you could just play that scene if you like, but
yeah.
The story is that for some reason, everyone in his class went to the circus and he didn't get a ticket. And he felt massively left out.
Yes.
And then he managed to get down there, but they wouldn't let him into the circus. So he was just stood outside, twiddling his thumbs while everyone was laughing and cheering inside the circus. You know, when you're a little boy left out, and he was the loneliest boy in the world.
Yes.
And then this baby elephant comes out of the circus right up to Dad. And Dad just had this encounter with this baby elephant, and it's a lovely scene.
Okay, well, we'll play that one and let people listen to it.
A circus came to Liskeard.
I love circuses. Do you think they have lions?
And tightrope walkers.
And acrobats?
Right, on the bus, everyone, all those who've booked a seat, show your tickets. Good, good, on you get. Let's see your ticket, Terry.
I haven't got one.
Well, why not? Did Auntie Rose and Uncle Jack not give you the money?
I don't know.
Well, you can't come if you haven't got a ticket. Frank Emmett, good. Muriel Osborne, good.
I was mortified at being left out of this treat of all treats. As the bus sped away, I was left alone to contemplate my loneliness.
You're home early? What's up?
Everybody's gone to the circus early from school.
Well, why haven't you gone?
I didn't have a ticket.
Well, why not?
Because I didn't have the money. I didn't know I was supposed to ask you. Now there's no bus and the train will be too late.
Yeah, boy, you can't miss the circus. Let's make you a sandwich. Here's a shilling and sixpence. That's your ticket and your train home. Now, off you go and thumb a lift. You hear?
Oh, thanks, Auntie Rose.
I ran out of the house towards Dobwalls and through Dobwalls. No cars. Out of Dobwalls, down the long hill and up the long drag past Moonwater. Still no cars. 4 miles I covered before I arrived at the circus in a field near the station.
I'm sorry, my handsome, you can't come in. Show's already started and the marquee's full anyway.
I've just run all the way here from Double Boys, please.
All the way from Double Boys? You my little Dalmatian. I can't, my dear. More than my job's worth.
I stood there with no breath, gasping with exhaustion and frustration, only just holding down my sobs. As my heartbeat slowed down, I wandered about, listening to the laughter and applause from inside. More gall to my soul. Someone was selling candy floss, unheard of during the war. It tasted filthy, even to my eager tongue. I went round the back and saw some dejected-looking ponies, which I tried to pat.
Here, out of it, you!
I was only patting them.
Up it! You ain't allowed out the back.
I moved resentfully away. And then, just as I was about to give up, a baby elephant came out of the marquee, right where I was standing. This creature, with its huge ears and searching trunk, seemed like a miracle. I swear it glowed.
Hello.
It stood shorter than I did, so must have been very young. I stared at it in wonder.
Can I pet it?
Of course you can, my dear.
I felt the sensitive top of its trunk explore my clothes. This magical, gigantic pet.
He's looking for my sandwich, I think.
He's a she, and she likes a sandwich, all right, don't you, my pet?
Can I give her some?
What's in it?
Cucumber.
Let me see. That'll be all right.
I broke my sandwich into the smallest pieces I could and fed them bit by bit to the elephant, who stood there, waiting for more. Its trunk running over my clothes and hands, thrilling me with its touch. Not always gentle, always demanding.
What's her name?
Gertrude.
That's a funny name. Hello, Gertrude. She's finished all my sandwich. What else does she like?
Fruit.
Like what?
Apples. She loves an apple, she does.
Can I get her one?
Of course.
I raced out of the field to the nearest greengrocer's, still just open, bought a pound of apples and tore back. The elephant was gone. Lungs bursting again, I nearly cried with frustration when it reappeared from the tent, having just done another turn. It headed straight for me. I nearly died with joy.
He remembers, you see.
Elephants do remember. Here you go, Gertrude.
I fed it the apples until told by the woman that was enough.
I gotta take her away now.
Bye, Gertrude. I'll see you soon.
I patted my new best friend goodbye, tried and failed to hold her trunk for a moment, watched her amble away, spent my last remaining pennies on a bag of chips, had my last apple, and, penniless, walked contentedly home.
Dominic, we'll come to a close now then, and I will say thank you so much for sharing all your insights and memories about this project, and I thoroughly hope it goes on to doing something in the theatre in the coming years.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for having me, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I really enjoy your podcast, and I like how thorough you are about the sort of details of history. Those are the sort of things that get lost, and just those little details that make history come to life. And this is almost the most important thing I've ever done in my life, and all I want is for as many people as possible to listen to Kisses on a Postcard, because I just think it is the most beautiful and powerful story, and I want as many people to be familiar with that story as possible.
Dominic, thank you for those kind words about my podcast. Good man. Do you want to give your own show a plug in some shape or form, website, etc.?
You can get the podcast at kissesonapostcard.com. All the links to the various podcast apps are there. And if you want a CD, you can also order, well, I say a CD, it's a 4 CD pack. You can order that at Kisses on a Postcard as well. Kissesonapostcard.com, I should say.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's kissesonapostcard.com. Well, that's the formal end of the interview, but I've got a few more things to say, and there's quite a bit more material, as you might expect, on the Fighting Through podcast, so stick around for the PS. Dominic, thank you so much for the massive efforts you've put into this project, and congratulations for an absolutely thrilling rendition of your dad's precious memories. I've grown to absolutely love Kisses on a Postcard, each and every song and scene. And listener, if you've enjoyed this episode, get yourself over to kissesonapostcard.com to get all the links and check out the full glorious 4.5-hour show on your favourite podcast player. And if you do, please follow or subscribe, because that gets the show higher in the rankings than almost anything you can do. We've got a mighty PS in a minute, featuring the Plymouth bombing, with Jack dicing with death looking for a lost knife, and our vacky chums playing dodgems with a doomed Dornier aircraft. So, like, write, rate, review or share Dominic's show, howsoever it pleases you. kissesonapostcard.com. Needless to say, if there's any more news forthcoming about Kisses, you'll hear it on the Fighting Through podcast first. Thank you so very much for your support and for making the time to listen to me. Enjoy everything, and please do hear me next time. P.S. So, if you're listening to this in the cinema, finish your hot dog and slurp up the rest of your Kiora orange and settle down to enjoy the finale. And if you're in the theatre, just pretending, then snuggle down into your comfy seat, hold the hand of anyone next to you, even if you don't know them, and enjoy these final thrilling bits from Kisses on a Postcard. Here's the Plymouth chapter for starters.
Jack and I used to go shopping with Auntie Rose once a week in Liskeard, 4 miles away, the next stop on the train. But what really filled us with excitement were the trips to Plymouth. We saved for these trips. I for dinky toys, models of our planes, tanks and ships with which we played endlessly, sea battles, aerial dogfights and ground warfare. Jack for army cap badges. His collection was quite something. He must have had almost all the regiments of the British Army, over 100, mounted on a green baize cloth. I learnt the geography of the country gazing at those badges, with their romantic names and symbols. The Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, the Black Watch, the Green Howards from Yorkshire, the White Horse of our own Royal West Kents, the Hunting Horn of the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry, the skull and crossbones of the 17th 21st Lancers, with Death or Glory scrolled underneath. We were in the middle of a war for our survival, and these were our saviours. That 22-mile train ride to Plymouth was glorious. The spectacular views, especially down the Loo Valley line that went beneath us like a model. And then the Saltash Bridge. Built by Isambard Kingdom Brunel, it announced. What a name. With an armed sentry at either end, it was the crossing point back into England. The sight of the warships, low, grey and stark, indescribably menacing, lying in the Tamar estuary and Devonport docks. Then Plymouth and the Hoe, the statue of Drake with his bowls, a stylish reminder of how to reduce the enemy to size. And then the pasties that tasted of potato and pepper but had never seen meat. Auntie Rose presided over these expeditions with 2 loaded shopping bags that we all struggled with as she led us first from queue to queue, then from shop window to shop window. One evening, we were waiting in Plymouth North Road Station for a train home that was very late. Jack had bought a miniature sheath knife in its leather sheath.
God, it's terrific.
Don't touch, it's mine.
He kept taking it from the shopping bag, unclipping the press stud fastening round the handle and half withdrawing the glistening blade. Our heads bent over it as we experimented how to hand it from his belt at the side or secretly at the back like a hunter's knife. It was a formidable purchase. The date was March 20th, 1941. It was a Thursday, and the first of the 2 nights on which the Luftwaffe wiped the centre of Plymouth from the face of the earth.
Come on, boys. Put that knife away till the proper time. When you get home, you play with that, not in here. You'll lose it. Oh, Joe, what's that?
Air raid sirens.
But they're a long way away.
All passengers in the subway, please. At once. Move along, please. All passengers in the subway at once. Come on, my dears, down under the station.
Come on, boys. Bring that back, Jack. I got this one, come on. Come here, Teddy, by me. Come on, down these steps. We'll be all right down here.
Are they bombs? No, there are guns shooting the Jerrys down. Bombs whistle.
All right. Let's sit on this bench here. By me, boys. What you looking for in those bags, Jack?
My knife. I can't find my knife.
What?
My new sheath knife. It's gone.
Perhaps it's in this bag. Here, let's see.
But Jack was gone, racing down the subway out of sight.
I left it in the buffet. Oh, I left it in the buffet.
Come back. Come back, boy. You can't. It's gone.
Here's the knife. Auntie Rose, I've got it. It's here. It was in the bag. Jack, I've got the knife. Jack.
Teddy, come
I
back.
set off after Jack, ignoring Auntie Rose's agonised voice as the tumult outside grew louder. I flew between the huddled groups of people, turned a corner and stared up the slope towards platform level. No Jack. I started to run up the slope. Then the explosion stopped me. I stood terrified. and then started bawling near the bottom of the slope, afraid to move, when hands grabbed me and pulled me back round the corner.
Here, boy, come here. I got you. You can't stand out there.
Let me go, my brother's up there.
What? Your brother?
He lost his knife.
What are you talking about?
Before I could say more,
Oh, boy, come here.
Auntie Rose enfolded us both.
You gave me heart failure, you did. Both of you.
God knows what hell we had put her through in those few moments. How do you explain to their parents that your two young charges ran up into the bombing and were blown to bits looking for a sheath knife that was in your shopping bag all the time?
I was gonna go up, Terry. It was only you that stopped me.
So was I.
I affirmed, equally inaccurately. We spent the night sitting on a bench while the inferno raged above us. My principal memory, after the initial knife panic, was that no matter how I shook with fright, the bench, which sat about 10 people, always quaked at a different rhythm, and I couldn't get my bottom synchronized to the common tempo of terror. The next morning, March 21st, was the first day of spring. We stood among broken glass and debris on the platform until a train took us across the miraculously unscathed Saltash Bridge. Plymouth was ablaze. Smoke hung everywhere. But the warships still lurked, apparently intact in Devonport docks and the Tamar estuary, out of the way. At each station, crowds of people met the train to ask for news, or just to stare at us.
Is anything left?
How many killed?
Are they sunk to fleet?
And when we reached Doubleboys, there at the end of the platform stood Uncle Jack, looking ridiculously small and vulnerable, till he saw the three of us waving wildly from a window. His shut face burst open into a grin that threatened to tear it in two. He hurried down the platform, took her shopping bags from her, put them on the ground, and hugged Auntie Rose.
Oh, Dougal, there you are. There you are.
It was a rare enough event to see them touching, let alone this display.
Of course I am. What do you think? People are watching.
You looked after the boys, did you, for me?
It was terrific, Uncle Jack.
I was ever so scared.
I'll bet you were, boy. I was too. I thought I'd got rid of you all at last, but there's no peace for the wicked, is there?
All of that day, in the sky to the east, hung a pall of smoke which turned to a red glow at dusk. And then the following night, the bombers came back.
Auntie Rose, Jack, Terry, are you in?
What is it, Elsie? What is it?
Auntie Rose, Uncle Jack, come quickly, come. The Germans are bombing Plymouth again. You can see it from the tour.
What are you talking about? You can't see Plymouth from the...
Quick, come on.
It's dark out there. How can you see?
You can see all the flashes and searchlights and hear the bombs and... My friends are there, Auntie Rose. In Plymouth. My mum might be. Everyone.
Don't worry, my love. Your mum's in Portsmouth with that sailor.
Auntie Rose, Elsie, come on. Everybody's going up the tour to see.
Come on. It's exciting.
You take your coat and cap. And tell Jack too. My Jack. Both Jacks. Oh.
Come on.
Do you want to stop here, Elsie, with me?
I don't want to miss it. Will you come too?
All right, girl. Yeah, put this on. Your mum wouldn't want you to catch your death now, would she? Yeah, we'll take these coats for the boys. Come on.
Oh, God, 'tis not possible.
Will anything be left? Look at that one.
Look! There'll be one of them caught in the searchlight. Oh, lost her. 'Tis hell on earth. 'Tis the inferno come to punish us.
Not us, Bess. Them.
Was it like that in the trenches, Uncle Jack? In the First War?
A bit, boy. Only we were soldiers.
My mum's not there. Is she, Auntie Rose?
Of course she's not, my lovely. She's in Portsmouth with her friend.
Earth's crying for her mother. Her mother never gave her a minute's thought.
Look at all those rockets going up!
That be the Royal Navy in Devonport docks giving them what for. Come on, boys. Hey, calm down, children. That's enough.
Look at those fires. The old sky is red. How can anyone survive in that?
Uncle Jack, is that what's happening in London to our mum and dad?
No, not nearly so. London's enormous. Plymouth's small. It just looks worse.
Oh, no. It's why we're all vackies.
Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. Swift to its close, ebbs out life's little day. Earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay in all around I see. O thou who changest not, abide with me. I fear no foe, with thee at hand to bless. Ills have no weight, and tears no bitterness. Where is death's sting? Where grave thy victory? I triumph still if thou abide with me.
Most of East Cornwall and South Devon watched Plymouth burn for nearly a week, under a pall of smoke by day and that red glow at night, like a false dawn. The fires could not be put out. They were beyond the scope of the fire services of several cities to deal with. Then, a month later, the Germans came back, and the whole business was repeated.
Auntie Rose, look!
Look! I see it, boy. All that smoke. That's the third night in a row Plymouth's been bombed. Oh, will they ever put it out?
No, over there, see? There's a German plane, look! It's ever so low.
Where, boy? Oh, don't be daft. Where are the swastikas? It's Red Cross, look. See the crosses on it?
It's not, it's a Dornier 17, a flying pencil.
I knew from my dinky toys. The plane was barely above us, following the line of the railway.
They're German crosses, see? It's turning towards us.
If they were Germans, they'd shoot us. Oh, you could see one of them plain. There, he's looking straight at us.
He's the gunner. Look, one engine's not working.
He's waving back. Wave, boy. Wave to him. Woo!
I think he's going to crash.
They were Germans. They'd shoot us.
Now, the other one stopped. Look, it's coming down in the valley.
Oh, my God. Do you think they were Germans?
Of course they were. It was a light bomber.
Why didn't they parachute?
I think they were too low.
Those poor boys. I saw them. Young like my Gwyn. Why didn't they shoot at us if they were Germans?
I think he must have been a Saxon. One of Uncle Jack's friends.
None of the German airmen survived the crash. The kids danced with glee in the village street, but I never stopped wondering about the waving gunner who had decided not to shoot a middle-aged woman and a little boy when they were sitting ducks.
Have you got any gum, chum?
Hey, you speak American?
That American?
You dig?
What?
You talk the jive, Clive?
My name's not Clive, it's Alan.
We kids, we loved them. We wore their hats, chewed their gum, held their strange hands and ate their candy. We rode on their jeeps, tooth-loosening joy rides across the fields. We drilled with their rifles and learned their slang.
Hello.
How are you?
Good day. We're soldiers from the US of A. Pleased to meet you, sir.
Pleased to meet you, ma'am.
Pleased to meet you, pretty lady.
We're here for Uncle Sam. At your service this fine day.
Any questions?
Please just say.
Questions? Loads! What's it like in the States? Is it just like the flicks? What's the weather like? Have you flown in a plane? Are there cops and robbers? Are there gangsters too? Are there cowboys and Indians? Do you know John Wayne? Have you ever seen a puma? Have you eaten a satsuma? Do you like hamburgers? Do your cows go moo? Have you crossed the Mississippi? Have you caught a barracuda? Have you been to Colorado or to Kalamazoo? Have you got puffs?
No, we have bars.
Do you catch the bus?
No, we all drive cars.
Have you ever had a pasty?
No, we have not.
Is it true that you eat dogs?
Only if they're hot.
Have you crossed the Golden Gate? Have you climbed the Empire State? Have you ever smelt a skunk? Why'd you call a tramp a bum? Do you have steam trains? Can you tell me, chum? One last question. Have you got any gum? Got any gum, chum?
We might have some.
Any gum, chum?
Now don't all scrum.
Any gum, chum?
It sure is yum. You can chew it till your mouth goes numb.
Got any gum, chum?
This sure is fun.
Any gum, chum?
Do the chewing hum.
Yummy, yum, yum.
Rum pum pum.
And that is how you do the chewing hum.
We've got snakes and alligators and our own refrigerators. Oranges and peaches, eagles, buffalo. Bears and avocados, a city called Chicago. Frightening tornadoes, tropics, desert, and snow. We've got rodeos and ranches, grapes upon the branches. We drink lots of Coca-Cola and there's ice to crush. We've got Mormons, we've got Quakers, we've got towering skyscrapers, but no privies for us. Our lavatories flush.
Do you drink tea?
No siree.
Speak Cherokee?
Not frequently.
Do you play billiards?
We shoot pool.
Would you like a game of cricket?
We don't understand the rules.
Do you know Clark Gable? Is Harper really dumb? Have you ever had a Hershey? Have you hit a home run? Please give me an answer. Can you tell me, John? One last question. Have you got any gum? Got any gum, chum?
We might have some.
Any gum, chum?
Now don't all scrum.
Any gum, chum?
It sure is yum. You can chew it till your mouth goes numb.
Got any gum, chum?
It sure is fun.
Any gum, chum?
Do the chewing hum.
Yummy, yum, yum.
Rum pum pum.
And that is how you do the chewing hum.
Elsie liked them too.
I think they're lovely boys. My mum ran off with a jolly Jack Tar and left me all at sea. This forgotten part of England has been a cage to me. I want to see the world. I want to get away. I would love somebody to love me. So every night I pray. I want to be a GI bride. I want to travel far and wide. on underwear. We'll dance the jitterbug and do the Susie Q. We'll have a big white house and some children too. I want to be a GI bride. Before you know, we'll be stateside. We'll make such a splash as we spend all our cash. I want to be a GI bride. Truth be told, I loved each one in turn, but now they're gone away. Oh, I hope that one will come for me, and this is what he'll say.
Will you be my GI bride, and to the altar let us ride? I know the sun will shine and you will look divine, so will you be my GI bride?
Well, I could be your swell GI, and to America we'd fly. The world would be so fine when you at last are mine, so will you be my GI bride?
We'll watch baseball
and eat French fries.
I'll take you to my mom
to eat her apple pie.
We'll drink root beer.
We'll travel far.
We'll go to Coney Island
in our motor car. I wanna be a GI bride, and then together we'll be tied. At some point you'll see they will come back for me, and then I really must decide. It doesn't matter who I marry, be it Don or Slick or Larry. I only want to be a GI bride.
How many kisses?
I vote 3.
What would Mum and Dad think of it here?
Don't know.
No electricity. They wouldn't like that.
I don't care.
There's no bathroom.
I don't care.
Outside lav, all they have. I can't go in an outside lav.
I don't mind. I don't care.
What if it's freezing cold out there?
That's what the pot's for, don't you see?
I vote 1.
I vote 3.
Just one bed, got to share, all squashed up in it.
I don't care. Kisses on a postcard we must write. Something we've got to do tonight. Kisses on a postcard, what'll they show? Only Mum is going to know.
What about Gwyn?
Gwyn's not bad, even though you can see he's mad.
Auntie Rose, what do you say?
She says weird things, but she's okay. Not Uncle Jack though, he plays rough. Pulled my hair, called me scruff.
Kisses on a postcard, what'll we do?
I still say 3.
Well, I say 2. Kisses on a postcard, 3, 2, 1.
Better be quick or it won't get done. If we put less than 3, Mum and Dad will think it's rotten here. They'll be worried.
Yeah, well, there's the trains, they're good.
And the station, right next to us.
That's terrific.
Hey, wait! I've just remembered. Hens!
What about hens?
Eggs, stupid. Real eggs. Not that horrible powdery stuff. Eggs for you, eggs for me. Eggs for breakfast, supper and tea. Poached or baked, scrambled or fried.
On board with soldiers on this side.
What do you say now? What's your score?
All right, 3.
I say 4.
You can't.
Why not?
Mum only said up to 3.
But don't you see? The more kisses we put, the more happy they're going to be.
Yeah, it's terrific here, really, isn't it? Like being on holiday, only there's no sea.
We don't have to stop at 4. Let's do hundreds.
Yeah!
Kisses on a postcard, one by one. All round the edges, this is
Give me a kiss, Billy. Oh, Henry, give your mum a kiss before you go to work.
I just could not resist giving you that last little kiss from Granny, and I can just imagine if this ever goes to the theatre and they do a curtain call, and you know all the cast are standing there, and I can I can picture everybody being cheered by the front row, and then for her encore, Granny walks onto the stage and gives everybody a kiss to rapturous applause. Oh dear. I'm Paul Cheel saying bye-bye now.
And I'm Dominic Frisby saying goodbye and enjoy Kisses on a Postcard.